Howdy. Welcome back to Cowboy Kropotkin. Now, I realize I have been away from some time, but be consoled that I have used some doohickeys to upgrade this production, as hopefully you can now see. Right, well, with no further ado, let's get back to it. Alright. Chapter 6, Dwellings. Those who have closely watched the growth of socialist ideas among the workers must have noticed that on one momentous question, the housing of the people, the definite conclusion is being imperceptibly arrived at. It is a fact that in the large towns of France and in many of the smaller ones, the workers are coming gradually to the conclusion that dwelling houses are in no sense the property of those whom the state recognizes as their owners. This idea had evolved naturally in the minds of the people, and nothing will ever convince them again that the right of property ought to extend to the houses. The house was not built by the owner, after all. It was erected, decorated, and furnished by innumerable workers in the timber yard, in the brick field, and the workshop, toiling for dear life at a minimal wage. The money spent by the owner was not the product of his own toil. It was amassed, like all other riches, by paying the workers 2/3 or only a half or maybe even a fraction of what was their due. Moreover, and here it is that the enormity of the whole proceeding becomes the most glaring, the house owes its actual value to the profit which the owner can make out of it. Now, this profit results from the fact that his house is built in a town, that is, in an agglomeration of thousands of other houses, possessing paved streets, bridges, quays, and fine public buildings, well lighted, and affording to its inhabitants 1,000 comforts and conveniences unknown in villages. A town in a regular communication with other towns, and itself a center of industry, commerce, science, and art. A town which the work of 20 or 30 generations has made habitable, healthy, and beautiful. A house in certain parts of Paris is valued at many thousands of pounds sterling, not because thousands of pounds worth of labor have been expended at that particular house, but because it is in Paris. Because, for centuries, workmen, artists, thinkers, and men of learning and letters have contributed to make Paris what it is today. A center of the industry, commerce, politics, art, and science. Because Paris has a past. Because, thanks to literature, the names of its streets are household words in foreign countries, as well as at home. Because it is the fruit of 18 centuries of toil. The work of 50 generations of the whole French nation. Who then can appropriate to himself the tiniest plot of land or the meanest building in such a city without committing a flagrant offense? Who then has the right to sell to any bidder the smallest portion of the common heritage? On that point, as we have said, the workers began to be agreed. The idea of free dwellings showed its existence very plainly during the siege of Paris, when the cry was for abatement, pure and simple, of the terms demanded by the landlords. It appeared again during the Commune of 1871, when the Paris workmen expected the Council of the Commune to decide boldly on the abolition of rent. And when the new revolution comes, it will be the first question that the poor will concern themselves. Whether in times of revolution or in times of peace, the worker must be housed somehow or another. He must have some sort of roof over his head. But, however tumbled down and squalid his dwelling may be, there is always a landlord who can evict him. True, during the revolution, the landlord cannot find bailiffs and police sergeants to throw the workman's rags and chattels out into the street, but who knows what new government will begin tomorrow? Who can say that it will not call coercion to its aid again, and send the police peck upon the tenant to hound him out of his hovels? Have we not seen after the Commune of Paris proclaim the remission of rents due up to the 1st of April only? After that, rent had to be paid, although Paris was in a state of chaos and the industry at a standstill. So that the Federate, quote-unquote, who had taken arms to defend the independence of Paris had absolutely nothing to depend upon, he and his family, but an allowance of 15 pence a day. Now, the worker must be made to see clearly that in refusing to pay rent to a landlord or owner, he is not simply profiting by the disorganization of authorities. He must understand that the abolition of rent itself is a recognized principle, sanctioned, so to speak, by the popular assent, that to be housed rent-free is a right proclaimed aloud by all the people. Are we going to wait till this measure, which is in harmony with every honest man's sense of justice, is taken up by the few socialists scattered around the middle-class elements, of which the provisionary government will be composed? If it were so, the people would have to wait long, till the return of reaction. In fact, this is why refusing uniforms and badges, those outward signs of authority and servitude, and remaining people among the people, the earnest revolutionists will work side by side with the masses, that the abolition of rent, the expropriation of houses, may become an accomplished fact. They will prepare the ground and encourage ideas to grow in this direction. And when the fruit of their labors is ripe, the people will proceed to expropriate the houses without giving heed to the theories which will certainly be thrust in their way. Theories about paying compensation to the landlords and finding first the necessary funds. On that day that the expropriation of houses takes place, on that day the exploited workers will have realized that new times have come, that labor will no longer have to bear the yoke of the rich and powerful, that equality has been openly proclaimed, that this revolution is a real fact, not a theatrical make-believe, like so many others have been preceding it. 2. If the idea of expropriation be adopted by the people, it will be carried into effect in spite of all the quote-unquote insurmountable obstacles which we are menaced. Of course, the good folks in new uniforms, seated in the official armchairs of the Hotel de Ville, will be sure to busy themselves in heaping up obstacles. They will talk of giving compensation to the landlords, of preparing statistics, and drawing up long reports. Yes, they would also be capable of drawing up reports long enough to outlast the hopes of the people, who, after waiting and starving in forced idleness and seeing nothing come of these official researches, would lose heart and faith in the revolution and abandon the field to the reactionaries. The new bureaucracy would end by making expropriation hateful in the eyes of the all. Here indeed is a rock which might shipwreck our hopes. But if the people turn a deaf ear to the specious arguments used to dazzle them, and realize that a new life needs new conditions, and if they undertake the task themselves, then expropriation can be effected without any great difficulty. But how? How can it be done, you ask us? We shall try to reply to this question, but with a reservation. We have no mention of tracing out the plans of expropriation in their smallest details. We know beforehand that all that any man or groups of men could suggest today would be far surpassed by the reality once it comes. Man will accomplish greater Man will accomplish greater things and accomplish them better and by simpler methods than those dictated to him beforehand. Thus, we will merely indicate the manner by which expropriation might be accomplished, without the intervention of government. We do not propose to go out of our way to answer those who declare that the thing is impossible. We confine ourselves to replying that we are not the upholders of any particular method of organization. We are only concerned to demonstrate that expropriation could be effected by popular initiative and could not be effected by any other means whatsoever. It seems fairly likely that, as soon as expropriation is fairly started, a group of volunteers will spring up in every district, street, and block of houses, and undertake to inquire into the number of flats and houses which are empty and of those which are overcrowded. the unwholesome slums and the houses which are too spacious for their occupants, and might well be used to house those who are still stifled in swarming tenements. In a few days, these volunteers will draw up complete lists for the street and the district of all the flats, tenements, and family mansions and villa residences, of all the rooms and suites of rooms, healthy and unhealthy, small and large, fetid dens and homes of luxury. Freely communicating with each other, these volunteers, neighborhood by neighborhood, would have their statistics complete. False statistics can be manufactured in boardrooms and offices, true enough, but true and exact statistics must begin with the individual and mount up from the simple to the complex. Then, without waiting for anyone's leave, those citizens will probably go and find their comrades, who are living in miserable garrets and hovels, and will say to them simply, "It is a real revolution this time, comrades, no mistake about it. Come to such a place this evening. All the neighborhood will be there. We're going to redistribute the dwelling houses. If you're tired of your slum garret, come out and choose one of the flats of 5 rooms that are to be disposed of. And when you have moved in, you shall stay, never fear. The people are up in arms, and he who would venture to evict you again would have to answer to them. But everyone will want a fine house or a spacious flat, we are told. No, you are quite certainly mistaken. It is not the people's way to clam out for the moon. On the contrary, every time we have seen them set about repairing a wrong, we have been struck by the good sense and the instinct for justice that animates the masses. Have we ever known them demand the impossible? Have we ever seen the people of Paris fighting amongst themselves while waiting for their rations of bread or firewood during the 2 sieges or the terrible years of 1792 or 1794? The patience and resignation which prevailed among them in 1871 was constantly presented for admiration by the foreign press correspondent. And yet, the patient waiters knew full well that the last comers would have to pass the day without food or without fire. We do not deny that there are plenty of egoistic instincts in isolated individuals. We are quite aware of it, in fact. But we contend that the very way to revive and nourish those instincts would be to confine such questions as the housing of people to any sort of board or committee. In fact, to the tender mercies of officialism in any shape or form. Then indeed all the evil passions spring back up, and it becomes a case of who is in the most influential person in the board. The least inequality causes wranglings and recriminations. If the smallest advantage is given to anyone, a tremendous hue and cry is raised, and not without reason. But if the people themselves, organized by streets, districts, and parishes, undertake to move the inhabitants of the slums into the half-empty dwellings of the middle classes, the trifling inconveniences, the little inequalities will be easily tided over. Rarely has appeal been made to the good instincts of the masses, only as a last resort to save the stinking ship in times of revolution. But never has such an appeal been made in vain. The heroism, the self-devotion of the toiler has never failed to respond to it, and thus it will be in the coming revolution. But when all is said and done, some inequalities, some inevitable injustices undoubtedly will remain. There are individuals in our societies whom no great crisis can lift out of the deep mire of egoism in which they are sunk. The question, however, is not whether there will be injustices or no, but rather how to limit the number of them. Now, all history and the experience of the human race and all social psychology unite in showing that the best and fairest way to trust the decision is to those who it concerns most nearly. It is they alone that can consider and allow for the 101 details which must necessarily be overlooked in a merely official redistribution. 3. Moreover, it's by no means necessary to make straightaway an absolutely equal redistribution of all the dwellings. There will no doubt be some inconveniences at first, but matters will soon be righted in a society which has adopted expropriation. When the masons, the carpenters, and all those who are concerned in house building know that their daily bread is secured to them, they will ask nothing better than to work at their old trades a few hours a day. They will adapt the fine houses which absorbed the time of a whole staff of servants for giving shelter to several families, and in a few months, homes will have sprung up, infinitely healthier and more conveniently arranged than those of today. And to those who are not yet comfortably housed, the anarchist commune will be able to say, "Patience, comrades. Palaces fairer and finer than any of those the capitalists have built for themselves will spring from the ground of our enfranchised city. They will belong to those who have most need of them. The anarchist commune does not build with an eye to revenues. These monuments, erected to its citizens, products of the collective spirit, will serve as models to all of humanity, and they will be yours. If the people of the revolution expropriate the houses and proclaim free lodgings, the communalizing of houses, and the right of each family to a decent dwelling, then the revolution will have assumed a communistic character from the first, and started on a course from which it will be by no means easy to turn it. It will have struck a fatal blow at individual property. 4. The expropriation of dwelling contains in germ the whole of the social revolution. On the manner of its accomplishment depends on the character of all that follows. Either we shall start on a good road leading to anarchist communism, or we shall remain sticking in the mud of despotic individualism. It is easy to see the numerous objections, theoretical on the one hand, practical on the other, which are sure to be met, as it will be a question of maintaining inequity at any price. Our opponents will of course protest in the name of justice. Is it not a crying shame, they will exclaim, the people of Paris should take all possession of all those fine houses, while the peasants in the country have only tumble-down huts to live in? But do not let us make a mistake. These enthusiasts for justice forget, by lapse of memory, to which they are subject, the crying shame which they themselves are tacitly defending. They forget that in this same city, the worker, along with his wife and children, suffocates in a noisome garret, while from his window he sees the rich man's palace. They forget that whole generations perish in crowded slums, starving for air and sunlight, and that to redress this injustice ought to be the first task of the revolution. Do not let these disingenuous protests hold us back. We know that inequality, which may exist between town and country in the early days of revolution, will be transitory and of a nature that will right itself from day to day. For the village will not fail to improve in dwellings as soon as the peasant has ceased to be a beast of burden, and of the farmer, the merchant, the moneylender, and the state. In order to avoid an accidental and transitory inequality, shall we stay our hand from righting an ancient wrong? The so-called practical objections are not very formidable either. We are bidden to consider the hard case of some poor fellow who by dint of privation has contrived to buy a house just large enough to hold his family. And we are going to deprive him of his hard-earned happiness, to turn him into the street. Well, certainly not. If his house is only just large enough for his family, by all means let him stay there. Let him work in his little garden, too. Our boys will not hinder him. Nay, they will lend him a helping hand if he needs be. But suppose he lets lodgings. Suppose he has empty rooms in his house. Then the people will make the lodger understand that he need not pay his former landlord any more rent. Stay where you are, but rent free. No more duns and collectors. Socialism has abolished all of that. Or, again, suppose a landlord has a score of rooms all to himself, and some poor woman lives nearby with 5 children in one room. In that case, the people would see home for the poor woman and her 5 children. Would that not be more just, more fair, than to leave the mother and her 5 little ones languishing in a garret, while Sir Gorgeous Midas sat at his ease in an empty mansion? Besides, good Sir Gorgeous would probably hasten to do it of his own accord. His wife will be delighted to be freed from half of her big, unwieldy house when there is no longer a staff of servants to keep it in order for her. So, you're going to turn everything upside down, said the defenders of law and order. There will be no end to the evictions and removals. Would it not be better to start fresh by turning everybody out of doors and redistributing the houses by lot? Thus our critics. But we are firmly persuaded that if no government interferes in the matter, if all the changes are entrusted to those free groups which have sprung up to undertake the work, the evictions and removals will be less numerous than those which take place in 1 year under the present system, owing to the rapacity of landlords. In the first place, there are in all large towns almost enough empty rooms and flats to lodge all the inhabitants of the slums. As to the palaces and suites of fine apartments, many working people would not live in them if they could. One could not keep up such houses without a large staff of servants. Their occupants would soon find themselves forced to seek less luxurious dwellings. The fine ladies would find that palaces were not so well adapted to conduct divvies, The fine ladies would find the palaces were not well adapted to self-help in the kitchen. Gradually, people would shake down. There would be no need to conduct divvies to a garret at the bayonet's point or install Lazarus in Divvy's palace by the help of an armed escort. People would shake down amicably into the available dwellings with the least possible friction and disturbance. Have we not seen the example of the village communes redistributing land and disturbing the owners of the allotment so little that one can only praise the intelligence and good sense of the methods they employ? Fewer fields change hands under the management of the Russian commune than where personal property holds sway, and is ever carrying its quarrels into the courts of law. And are we to believe that the inhabitants of a great European city would be less intelligent, less educated, less capable of organization than Russian or Hindu peasants? Moreover, we must not blink at the fact that every revolution means a certain disturbance to everyday life. And to those who expect this tremendous climb out of the old grooves to be accomplished without so much as jarring the dishes on their dinner tables, will find themselves mistaken. It is true that governments can change without disturbing wealthy citizens at dinner. But the crimes of society towards those who have nourished and supported the wealthy are not to be redressed by any such political slide of parties. Undoubtedly, there will be a disturbance. But it must not be one of pure loss. It must be minimized. Again, it is impossible to lay too much stress on this maxim. It will be by addressing ourselves to the interested parties, and not to boards and committees, that we shall succeed best in reducing the sum of inconveniences for everybody. The people commit blunder on blunder when they have to choose by ballot some harebrained candidate who solicits the honor of representing them and talks himself to know all, to do all, and to organize all. But when they take upon themselves to organize what they know, what touches them directly, they do it better than all the talking shops put together. Is not a Paris commune an instance in point, and the great dockers' strike? Have we not constant evidence of this fact in every single village commune? I ask you. Indeed. Well, next time we'll be reading Chapter 7, Clothing. I hope you've enjoyed this upgrade, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.